No one who is psychologically healthy likes it when pain and suffering come into their lives or into the lives of a loved one. Some present here this afternoon have known real physical or psychological pain. Illness may be robbing your vitality. Age may prevent you from doing some of your favorite things. Members of your family may be experiencing difficulties, and you share in their sorrow. Without naming names, we probably all could list persons suffering from terminal illnesses, serious personal problems, and the like. Pain and suffering are not something we readily embrace. Yet, the scriptures this afternoon invite us to reflect on the presence of suffering in our lives and how this reality can be part of our faith journey. Let's focus on the reading from the 16th chapter of Matthew that we just heard and see how it may be speaking to us. What we have here is the second part of a two-part installment of a dialogue involving Christ and Peter. Last week, we heard Peter declaring that Christ was the Son of God, and Christ praised Peter and declared that he was the rock on which he would build his church. Today, the tables are turned, and Peter becomes not a foundational rock, but a stumbling block, and is told to get behind me. What is at issue is Peter's inability to understand that the Messiah would suffer and die, and that his followers must deny themselves and take up the cross as well. So much around us says just the opposite. We're told, put yourself first and do everything possible to keep pain and suffering away from you. There's an old saying that it's much easier to wear the cross than to bear the cross. In other words, we can wear a cross around our neck rather easily, but when real suffering comes into our lives, bearing the cross can be really difficult. One of my favorite authors concerning the role of suffering in the life of the believer is C.S. Lewis. Lewis says that pain tells us the truth. It tells us that we are not in ultimate control. He says we develop a sense of security and of superiority when we don't feel pain or experience difficulties in our lives. Pain and suffering, Lewis would say, remind me that my life is limited and I am dependent on others and ultimately dependent upon God. What Lewis argues is that we can use the experience of pain and suffering to renew a sense of dependence we have on God. We need God's love, God's forgiveness, God's mercy. We need Him to make sense of the absurdity we sometimes experience in life. In the gospel, Jesus says to Peter, "Get behind me." I like that wording because it reminds me what happens in distance racing. It's really not always bad to be behind someone, because that someone actually creates a type of draft that carries you forward. I like to think that in this long distance race we call life, that Jesus is urging us to get behind Him, especially in our pain and suffering, so that we can identify with His own suffering and death. And He wants to carry us forward. As we gather around the altar this afternoon, we pray in a special way for those among us who are experiencing difficulties in their lives. May this Eucharist be a source of comfort and blessing for them, as well as for ourselves, as we take up our cross and get behind the Lord.